The rain had been falling since morning, soft and endless, like the sky was too sad to stop crying. The streets were quiet. Cars passed slowly through puddles, and the people who hurried by were hidden under umbrellas, their faces blurred behind the mist. Ethan Cole stood under a broken bridge with his old camera hanging around his neck. He was cold, tired, and wet. His jeans were soaked at the bottom, and his shoes made squishy sounds every time he moved. He had been waiting for hours, waiting for something worth photographing, something that made him feel again. Ethan was not always like this. A few years ago, he was one of the best young photographers in the city. His pictures used to hang in small galleries. People said he had an eye for beauty. But things changed when his father died suddenly. The sadness took away his passion. His girlfriend left. His career went down. Now, photography was no longer art, it was survival. He took pictures and sold them for small money, just enough to eat and pay rent for a tiny room that smelled of rain and coffee. That afternoon, as the rain kept falling, Ethan thought about giving up. He looked at the grey street and whispered to himself, maybe there's nothing left to capture in this world. Then he saw her. She appeared through the mist, walking slowly down the empty road. She wore a bright yellow coat that stood out against the grey world. Her hair was dark and wet, sticking to her cheeks. But what caught Ethan's attention was her face. She was smiling. Not a fake smile, not one for anyone to see, but a deep, peaceful smile, like she was feeling something pure inside her heart. She didn't carry an umbrella. She let the rain fall freely on her face. She lifted her head toward the sky, closed her eyes, and just smiled. Ethan froze. For the first time in months, he felt something move inside him, a quiet spark of wonder. Without thinking, he lifted his camera. The rain blurred his view, but he focused as best as he could. He pressed the button. Click. The sound of the shutter was small, but it felt powerful. That single moment, that single smile filled the whole frame with light. The woman didn't notice him. She stood there for a few seconds longer, then turned the corner and disappeared. Ethan lowered his camera slowly, his heart beating faster than it had in a long time. He didn't even know her name, but he knew what he had captured was something rare, something honest. He wiped the lens, checked the photo, and his breath caught. Even though the picture was slightly blurred by the rain, the emotion was clear. Her eyes were closed, but her smile told a story. There was peace, pain, and freedom all mixed together, like she had finally let go of something heavy. Ethan stood there, staring at the photo on his screen. He whispered, "Who are you?" He didn't know why, but he felt that the picture was more than just a photo. It was like a message from life itself telling him not to give up yet. That night, back in his small apartment, Ethan dried his camera and uploaded the photo to his computer. He stared at it again for a long time. He adjusted the light, softened the edges, and named it "The Girl in the Rain." Then, without expecting much, he posted it online with a short caption. "Sometimes, beauty appears when you least expect it." He went to bed, not knowing that his life was about to change. The next morning, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications flooded his screen, hundreds, then thousands. The post had exploded overnight. People were sharing it everywhere. Some wrote comments like, "This made me cry and she looks like someone who found peace in pain." Ethan couldn't believe it. For months, he had been invisible. Now, everyone was talking about his picture. News blogs shared it. A small art magazine asked to feature it. Strangers sent messages saying the image made them feel hope. But even with all the excitement, Ethan's mind was on one thing: the woman in the photo. Who was she? Why was she smiling in the rain? What was her story? He spent the next few days walking through the same streets, hoping to see her again, but she never appeared. Each day the sky remained grey, and the rain returned, but the yellow coat was gone. Still, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her. That single moment had reminded him why he started taking photos in the first place: to find truth in small, quiet things. He printed the photo and placed it on his wall. Every time he looked at it, it gave him strength. In his heart, he felt something strange, like that woman had entered his life for a reason. He didn't know it yet, but that photograph would not only bring him fame, it would bring him face to face with the person who would change his destiny forever. Outside, the rain began to fall again, softly tapping against his window. Ethan picked up his camera, looked at the picture one more time, and whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are." The next few days passed like a dream. Ethan's phone didn't stop buzzing, and every time he opened his social media, the picture of the girl in the rain appeared again, shared by strangers, reposted by art pages, even used as a background by people he had never met. It was everywhere. He sat by his small window, still half awake, sipping cheap coffee as he scrolled through the comments. This photo feels alive. There's sadness and peace in her smile. Who is she? This made me cry. Ethan smiled weakly. He didn't feel proud, exactly, just surprised. He had taken hundreds of pictures before, but none had touched people like this one. It was as if the rain, the light, and the woman's expression had spoken directly to every soul that saw it. By the end of the week, art blogs had started calling him the photographer who captured hope. A local magazine even came to interview him in his small apartment. Their main question was always the same: who's the woman in the photo? And every time, Ethan gave the same answer: I don't know. That truth made the picture even more mysterious. People began to search for her. Some said she was a model, others said she was an angel, a ghost, or even someone who had passed away long ago. Ethan didn't pay attention to the rumors. He just wished he could see her again, even once. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a young nurse named Lila Morgan sat on a hospital bench during her short lunch break. She was scrolling through her phone, trying to escape the noise of the ward for a few minutes. Her eyes were tired, her uniform slightly damp with sweat, and her hands smelled faintly of antiseptic. She didn't expect to see anything that would stop her heart. But then, as she scrolled, she saw it. Her thumb froze. There she was. The girl in the yellow coat. Standing in the rain. Smiling. Her heart started beating faster. The photo filled her screen, and it was her. The exact moment she had lifted her face to the sky. The same quiet smile. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The room around her disappeared. The sound of hospital machines faded away. It felt like the world had paused, holding its breath with her. That photo had been taken almost 6 months ago, on the very day her mother died. She remembered it so clearly. She had been at the hospital all morning, holding her mother's weak hand, listening to her fading voice. Her mother had smiled and whispered, "Promise me you'll keep living, Lila. Promise you'll find beauty, even when it rains." After her mother's last breath, Lila had walked out into the street, numb and broken. The rain had started to fall, cold but soft. For the first time in days, she had lifted her face and smiled through her tears, smiling not because she was happy, but because she wanted to keep her promise. And someone had taken that picture. She stared at the screen, her hand trembling. There were thousands of comments. People saying they felt peace, hope, and love when they saw her smile. They didn't know that smile came from pain. They didn't know that behind it was a heart learning to survive loss. Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away before anyone saw. She didn't want attention. She didn't want to become famous for her grief. She just closed her phone and pressed it against her chest. Later that night, she sat on her small apartment bed, the room dim and silent. She looked again at the photo and whispered, "You took my picture, and somehow, you gave it back to the world." She searched for the photographer's name, Ethan Cole. She saw his post. He hadn't written much, only the words, "Sometimes, beauty appears when you least expect it." For the first time in months, Lila smiled, a real one. She wanted to thank him, to tell him the story behind that smile, but she didn't. Something held her back. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was fate waiting for the right time. The next week, the hospital where she worked displayed the photo on the wall of the lobby. A patient's family had donated it after seeing how peaceful it looked. Everyone loved it. Nobody knew it was her. Every time Lila walked past it, she felt a strange mix of sadness and warmth. The world had found comfort in a moment that was born out of her deepest pain. Meanwhile, Ethan's life began to change faster than he could handle. He was invited to small exhibitions, met gallery owners, and received calls from people offering him photography jobs. For the first time in years, he felt noticed. But deep down, he knew this success wasn't really his alone. It belonged to her, the girl in the rain. At night, he often dreamed about finding her. In his dreams, she turned to him and smiled the same way, but when he reached out, the rain washed her away. He would wake up breathless, whispering, "Who are you?" One rainy evening, while sitting in a small cafe downtown, he noticed the same photo printed in a newspaper on the next table. The headline read, "The photo that touched 1,000,000 hearts." He smiled softly, looking out through the foggy window. The rain was falling again, just like the day he took the picture. For a moment, he imagined her walking down the street once more, yellow coat, soft smile, eyes closed. But she didn't come. Only raindrops and silence kept him company. Still, something inside Ethan had changed. The emptiness he had carried for so long was slowly being replaced by purpose. He wanted to take more pictures, to tell more stories, to find meaning again. He didn't know that destiny was already writing the next chapter, one that would bring the two of them face to face. And when that day came, the story behind the girl in the rain would finally be revealed, and neither of their lives would ever be the same again. The rain had stopped that morning, but the streets still carried the smell of wet pavement and fresh air. Ethan stood outside the city gallery, adjusting his tie nervously. Inside, a small crowd waited for him, his first solo exhibition since his photo went viral. He had barely slept the night before. For weeks, he had worked on new photographs, people on trains, children playing, lonely faces lit by soft morning light. But at the center of the gallery, framed in silver, was the picture that started it all, the girl in the rain. People were already gathered around it, whispering and taking pictures. Ethan watched them quietly from a corner. Everyone had their own theory about who she was. Some said she was a model. Others said she was his lost love. Ethan didn't correct them. He didn't even know her name. The event was loud music, laughter, flashes from cameras, but Ethan's mind felt far away. He smiled politely when people congratulated him, but inside he felt empty. He missed the quietness that came with taking photos alone. After a few hours, he started feeling dizzy. The air felt heavy, and his vision blurred. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the lack of sleep, but suddenly his legs gave way. Ethan, someone shouted as everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on a hospital bed. The lights above him were soft, and he could hear the faint beeping of machines. For a few seconds, he couldn't remember where he was. Then the door opened quietly, and a nurse walked in. "Good morning," she said gently. "How are you feeling?" Her voice was calm and warm. Ethan blinked a few times, trying to focus on her face. There was something familiar about her eyes, gentle but strong, the kind that carried hidden stories. "I'm fine," he murmured. "Just tired." She smiled kindly. "You collapsed at your exhibition. They brought you here last night. You'll need to rest for a while." Ethan nodded. "Thank you, nurse." "Lila," she said, smiling again. "My name is Lila Morgan." He repeated it softly. "Lila. Nice name." As she checked his pulse and adjusted the foreline, Ethan watched her. There was something peaceful about the way she moved, careful, quiet, and patient. Her smile was faint, but when it appeared, it brightened the whole room. When she left, Ethan closed his eyes. For some reason, her voice stayed in his mind. It reminded him of rain, soft but full of emotion. Lila, meanwhile, stood outside his room, her heart beating fast. When she had first read his name on the chart, she froze. Ethan Cole. The same photographer. The one who took that photo, her photo. She had promised herself she would stay calm, act professional, and not reveal anything. But seeing him in person stirred something deep inside her. The man who had unknowingly captured her most painful yet peaceful moment was lying right there. She took a deep breath before going back inside. "You should try to eat something," she said, placing a tray beside him. Ethan smiled weakly. "Hospital food, my favorite," he joked. Lila laughed softly. "Don't worry, I'll ask them to bring you something better later." Her laugh made him smile for real. For the first time since the photo went viral, he felt comfortable with someone. There was no noise, no questions, no cameras, just a quiet kindness that felt familiar. Days passed. Ethan's health improved slowly. Every morning, Lila came in to check on him, and they talked. At first, their conversations were short about his recovery, food, and rest. But soon, they began to share pieces of their lives. Ethan told her how he once loved photography but lost his way after his father's death. How that one picture, the girl in the rain, gave him a second chance. Lila listened quietly, her eyes soft. She wanted to tell him that she was that girl, that the photo had changed her too. But every time she tried to speak, her throat tightened. She was afraid of what it would mean, afraid he might see her differently. One evening, after visiting hours were over, Lila came in to check on him one last time. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Ethan was sitting up, looking at something on his laptop. He smiled when he saw her. "Hey, Lila. I was just organizing some of my photos." May I see? She asked gently. Of course. He turned the screen toward her. The first photo was of a sunset over the city. The second was a child running through puddles. And then there it was. The girl in the rain. Lila froze. Her heart skipped. Seeing it again, that moment captured forever, filled her with both warmth and pain. She could almost feel the rain again on her face. Ethan noticed the look in her eyes. You like that one? She nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, very much. He smiled faintly. That photo changed everything for me. When I took it, I was ready to give up. But that woman's smile, it reminded me that beauty still exists, even in sadness. Lila looked down, her eyes glistening. That's beautiful, she said softly. He looked at her, puzzled. Why do I feel like you understand that more than most people? She wanted to tell him the truth right then. The words almost escaped her lips. It was me. But something stopped her. Maybe it wasn't time yet. Maybe fate wanted them to wait a little longer. So she just smiled instead, the same gentle smile she had worn that day in the rain. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't explain it, but something in that smile felt familiar, like déjà vu. That night, after Lila left, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her. Her calmness, her eyes, that strange connection he couldn't name. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Lila sat by the window, looking out at the falling rain. She whispered, Ethan, if only you knew. Neither of them realized it yet, but destiny had already started to weave their stories together. The photographer and the girl he had once captured without knowing, now standing face to face, both healing from their own storms. And soon, the truth would change everything. It was late evening when the truth began to rise between them, quiet, slow, like the moon lifting itself over the horizon. The hospital room was dim and calm, filled with the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside Ethan's bed. The world outside was wrapped in rain again. Ethan sat by the window, watching drops slide down the glass like tiny rivers. Lila entered the room silently, carrying a cup of warm tea. I thought you could use this, she said, placing it on the table beside him. Thank you, he replied with a tired smile. You're always saving me somehow. She laughed softly, but her heart felt heavy. For days, she had carried the truth inside her, locked tightly like a fragile secret. She wanted to tell him everything, that she was the girl in the rain, that the photo he had taken wasn't just a random moment, that it carried a story of love and loss. But every time she tried, fear stopped her. Tonight, though, something felt different. Maybe it was the rain, maybe the softness in his voice, or maybe the way fate quietly whispered that the time had come. Ethan, she said softly. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you take that photo, the one of the woman in the rain? He smiled faintly. Because she looked free. Everyone else that day was hiding from the rain, covering themselves, rushing away. But she stood there, smiling at the sky, as if she didn't care who was watching. I thought it was beautiful, and sad at the same time. It reminded me of something I had lost. What did you lose? He looked down. Hope. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Only the soft patter of rain could be heard. Lila sat beside his bed, her fingers trembling slightly. Ethan, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. There's something you should know. He looked up, curious. What is it? She hesitated. The woman in that photo, the girl in the rain, it was me. Ethan blinked, thinking he hadn't heard her right. What did you say? It was me, she said again, tears welling in her eyes. That day, 6 months ago. I wasn't smiling because I was happy. I was smiling because I had just lost my mother. Ethan froze. The room felt suddenly still. He stared at her, unable to speak. Lila continued, her voice trembling. My mother was sick for a long time. I stayed by her side every day at the hospital. The morning she died, she made me promise to keep living to find beauty even in pain. After she was gone, I walked outside, and it started to rain. I didn't have an umbrella, and I didn't care. I lifted my face to the sky, trying to keep that promise. That's when you took the photo. She wiped her tears, her voice breaking. When I saw it online, I cried. That moment, that pain, it belonged to me. But through your photo, it became something else. People saw peace. They saw hope. You made something beautiful out of my grief. Ethan's eyes glistened. He reached out, gently touching her hand. Lila. I don't know what to say. She smiled through her tears. You don't have to say anything. I just thought you should know the truth. He looked at her for a long time, the rain reflecting in his eyes. Do you realize what that photo did to me? He said softly. I was lost, Lila. My father had died, my career was gone, and I was ready to quit photography forever. But that one picture, your smile, it brought me back to life. It reminded me that beauty still exists, even when everything hurts. You didn't just keep your promise to your mother that day, you saved a stranger too. Lila covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. For the first time, their hearts felt seen, connected by a single, unplanned moment that had changed them both. He smiled faintly. You know what's strange? I always felt like I knew that woman somehow. Like her sadness spoke to mine. Lila laughed softly through her tears. Maybe that's why fate crossed our paths again. For a while, they sat in silence, the rain filling the room with its soft music. Ethan looked at her with a kind of wonder, as if seeing her for the first time, not just as a nurse, but as the soul he had captured unknowingly months ago. Can I take another picture of you? He asked quietly. She looked surprised. Here. Now. He nodded. Yes. Not as the girl in the rain, but as Lila. The woman who found light again. She smiled shyly and nodded. Ethan reached for his camera from the bedside table. The room was dim, the window misty, but the light fell gently across her face. Ready, he said softly. She looked at him, her eyes warm and calm. Ready. He clicked the shutter. Click. The sound was small, but it filled the room with magic, the same sound that had once changed both their lives. When he looked at the photo, he smiled. There was no rain this time, no sadness, just peace. He turned the camera toward her, and she laughed softly. You're good at finding beauty, Ethan. He shook his head. No, Lila. I just capture what's already there. That night, after she left his room, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His heart felt full. Full of gratitude, full of awe, full of something new he hadn't felt in a long time. Lila, walking home in the quiet drizzle, felt the same. For years, her mother's last words had echoed in her heart, find beauty, even in the rain. Now, she finally understood. It wasn't about pretending that pain didn't exist. It was about finding light in the middle of it and sharing that light with someone else. The next morning, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. Sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, and everything smelled fresh and new. And somewhere deep inside, both Ethan and Lila knew the rain had finally stopped, not just outside, but in their hearts. The morning was golden, soft sunlight falling through the windows of the art gallery. The walls were covered with frames, each holding a story, a face, a memory. Ethan stood quietly at the center of it all, wearing a simple black shirt, his hands trembling just a little. It was his first solo exhibition, the moment he had dreamed of for years. The crowd was larger than he expected. People whispered softly as they walked from one photograph to another, stopping, smiling, sometimes wiping away tears. There was something different about his work, something raw and honest. They weren't just pictures, they were pieces of his soul. Lila stood near the entrance, dressed in a soft blue dress. She watched Ethan with a smile that reached her eyes. It had been months since that night she confessed the truth that she was the girl in the rain. Ethan hadn't spoken for a full minute after she told him. He had just looked at her, eyes glistening, as if searching for the right words. Then he whispered, "That photo saved my life." Now, as she stood among strangers who admired his art, she couldn't stop feeling proud that she had unknowingly been part of his healing. At the far end of the gallery, a large white curtain covered the final photograph of the exhibition. It was the one nobody had seen yet. People were whispering about it. Rumors said it was something special, something personal. Mrs. Turner, the old gallery owner who had first believed in Ethan's talent, walked up to the microphone. Her voice cracked slightly with age but carried warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, smiling at the audience, "behind this curtain is the final piece of Ethan Cole's collection. He calls it the photograph that changed everything." The lights dimmed. The soft notes of piano music began playing in the background. Ethan walked slowly toward the curtain, feeling his heartbeat quicken. He glanced at Lila once their eyes met and she nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. With one gentle pull, he unveiled the photograph. The crowd gasped. There, framed in soft light, was a picture of Ethan and Lila standing together in the rain, the same bridge, the same silver sky. Ethan was holding his camera down, looking at her with quiet admiration, and Lila was smiling that same pure, unguarded smile that had changed his life. But this time, the rain wasn't cold or lonely. It shimmered like gold. The photo seemed alive, full of emotion and hope. Beneath it, in small letters, Ethan had written, "Sometimes fate speaks through silence, and love begins with a single photograph." People clapped softly, but many were too moved to say anything. Some took pictures of the frame, while others simply stood in awe. A woman whispered to her friend, "It's beautiful, like the story of two souls meant to meet." Ethan turned to the crowd. His voice shook, but his words were strong. "I took a picture one rainy afternoon," he began. "It was just a random moment, a stranger smiling at the sky. But that smile gave me a reason to keep going when I had nothing left. I didn't know who she was or what she was going through. All I knew was that her smile looked like hope." He paused, glancing at Lila again. "Months later, fate brought her back into my life, not through a lens this time, but through kindness. She didn't just save my photograph, she saved me." There was a hush in the room. People were crying quietly. Someone whispered, "This feels real." Lila walked up to him, tears in her eyes, and took his hand. "And you saved me too," she said softly. That day in the rain I had just lost my mother. I didn't think I'd smile again. But you captured a moment that reminded me that love never truly dies. You gave me something to live for. Ethan squeezed her hand. For a long moment, the world around them disappeared. There were no cameras, no noise, just two hearts that had found their way home. Later that evening, after the crowd left and the lights were dimmed, Ethan and Lila sat on the gallery floor surrounded by the photographs. He leaned back against the wall, camera resting on his lap. "What will you do next?" Lila asked softly. Ethan smiled. "Maybe take another picture. Not for fame this time, just for us." Lila laughed lightly. "What if it rains again?" "Then we'll stand in it," Ethan said, looking at her. Together. Outside, the first drops began to fall, gentle, silver, soft. Ethan picked up his camera and opened the door. They stepped out into the rain, hand in hand. Lila tilted her face upward, eyes closed, smiling just like before. Ethan raised the camera, hesitated for a heartbeat, then took the shot. Click. A single sound, quiet, beautiful, sealing their story forever. Months later, the photo hung beside the first one. 2 frames. 2 lives. 2 moments bound by fate. The first was called The Girl in the Rain. The second, The Day the Rain Smiled Back. And somewhere below them, a note written in Ethan's handwriting read: "One act of kindness, one captured smile, sometimes that's all it takes to save 2 souls." The rain kept falling softly outside, as if blessing the story it helped create.